Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're talking about Hanukkah, particularly about Messiah and the temple. And this may explain why Hanukkah, or Hanukkah, as people like to say, that's not be able to make the cat sound, is so important for should be so important for believers to observe and celebrate. And we'll look at why I said that here in a moment. But first, a quick explanation of what it is, not from the various sources of the rabbis, but from the book of Daniel. The story of Hanukkah was written in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, more more than 500 years before, or so, about 500 years before it ever occurred. In fact, Daniel 11 is so accurate that skeptics of the Bible used to say it had to be written. It had to be written much later. It's obviously history someone wrote and try to pass off as prophecy. But then the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the events of the Maccabees and Hanukkah that it tells about in Antiochus Epiphanes didn't di- were didn't occur till 35 or more years after the copy of the book of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls had been written. So there's there's just no doubt it was history written beforehand. And here's what that history says. We're going to again give a brief overview of it. There's two sides to it. It's truly a good versus evil story. We're going to start with the evil. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So he shall do. He shall even return and have intelligence them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand in his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. They shall take away the daily sacrifice. And they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall I corrupt by flatteries. The people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Okay, that last part we'll talk about next. That's the good. That's part of the good in this good versus evil story. But it starts up with the evil. Now, Chatim is Hebrew for Italy today. The Romans, in particular, the him is a guy called Antiochus Epiphanes, who had talked about he came to power and stuff before. So I went over this thoroughly in previous years. But today we're not doing just letting you know it's Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's emperor of the Seleucid Empire. Alexander the Great, after he died, his generals broke his empire into four smaller empires. And with respect to Israel, one was to the south, the Ptolemy Empire that was located basically in Africa, Egypt, Egypt, parts of Libya, Ethiopia, except were all part of the Ptolemy Empire. And then there was the Seleucid Empire directly north of Israel. So centered between these two is the land of Israel, or Judea, the former province of Judea under the Persians. And that empire went along it was kind of funnel shaped in a narrow strip along the Mediterranean Sea, uh, go, going north and south. But going east, it went way east, covered the northern half of India, Afghanistan, all the way over to the border of Western China today, pretty much most of Middle Asia south of Russia. All this was inside the Seleucid Empire, and this guy here, Antiochus Epiphanes, was the emperor of it. It was the strongest empire in the largest empire in the world at the time, and the strongest. And this arms that stood on his part was that army. He had the strength of this empire on his side, and now, but notice, so he's got the strength. But what happened? The Romans, he wanted to take over the Southern Empire, and these two empires, Ptolemy and Seleucid, fought over Israel, took control of it back and forth for centuries, really. Well, he wanted to take over the Southern Empire, and they hired the Romans to come against him. And he realized he could not beat the Ptolemies plus the Romans, and so he said he'd been winning up to this point. in everything he did. And he decided the problem was that the problem was these people in Judea, they didn't worship the Greek gods. All these generals of Alexander the Great had went on this assimilation campaign where everyone, you will be assimilated, resistance is futile. The whole Borg storyline in Star Trek came from this. So, so except now, the people in Judea wore Greek clothing and did certain things, but there were certain things they just would not quit. They would not worship the Greek gods. They kept the temple there. They would, they sought they under their agreement they sought God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on behalf of the Greek rulers or whoever at the time. Okay, but they would not worship the Greek gods. They would not. They would not give up. They would not eat unclean foods and celebrate the Greek religious festivals. Celebrating the ones in the Torah instead. And he decided the problem why he got turned back was because of this holy covenant that it displeased the Greek gods who've been favoring him because this one little spot had been allowed to not assimilate in a religious sense as well as everything else. So he was determined to do away with it. So he made a plot with, have intelligence. He went into conspiracy with who? Them that forsake the Holy Covenant. These are Jewish people. So on the evil side, you have Antiochus Epiphanes, this huge army he has of this Greek Empire, and Jews who do not who forsake the Holy Covenant. They were like, let's assimilate. We're a-okay with that. They want the whole Greek lifestyle of drinking and sexual immorality and homosexuality and the like. So they joined him and in this plot to get rid of the Holy Covenant. And they polluted the sanctuary of strength. That's the temple. They took away the daily sacrifices, or at least they worked with him to do so. And they set up this abomination made desolate, which is a statue of Zeus with Antiochus Epiphanes' own face on it. So people are worshiping an image of him in the holy temple. And notice those that do wickedly against the covenant. Again, Jewish people who once again turned away from God, turned away from his covenant. We're doing this, except not all of them. A small group that grew of rebels are who's on the good side. We're going to talk about them next. So, and they're brought out in Daniel 11, 32 through 34. For such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people who know their God shall be strong and do exploits. They understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Okay, so notice these are the people that do know their God's going to be strong and do exploits. Now, these people were called the Maccabees. I'm going to explain that here in a moment, or Maccabi in Hebrew. Now, who were the hammer? And they started with a single priest, with a single priest, Matthias, in Modim, who would not. They went around. What they went down is they gathered the Jews, went around forcing them to make sacrifice to the Greek gods or die. And this old priest Matthias, refused to do it. And a young Jewish man stepped to make one on his behalf, trying to save Matthias. And Matthias grabbed one of the swords of one of the guards, which caught everyone off guard, and stabbed and killed the young man to keep him from making a sacrifice on his behalf to these Greek gods. And in the confusion, he escaped. And him and his 5 sons literally headed to the hills. Well, one of his sons was named Judah. Maccabee was his nickname. The hammer, Maccabi. It's also Marcus in Greek. I mean, Marcus is actually a Latin word, but it comes from the same word, okay? Matthias and Matthew, Matthew are related as well. So this priest, the faithful priest, does this. And so it starts off 6 men who say, we're not going to, resistance is essential. We will not assimilate. Stand up against the mightiest empire on the earth. And then they begin instructing others who have similar sentiments. They form this group. They call themselves the Maccabees after their leader, Judas Maccabee. And a long war of 7 years long war carries on. Matthias and 4 of his sons die in this war. They fell by the sword, in flame, and some were taken captive and spoil. But at the end of it, it's all over. But and when they had this terrible time, they were helped with a little help. And that little help was from Greeks who joined them. Greeks who had left off worshiping idols, not got circumcised. They're the God-fearers you read about in the New Testament. They're no longer worshiping idols, and they're going to they helped in various ways. Sometimes they would they're trying to test to see if someone was going to break off from the covenants of God or not. They try to make them eat unclean food. An distraction. They create a distraction of some sort. And in a distraction, they would grab the unclean food off the Jews' plate and eat it, and let those who were doing it think the Jews had done it. Okay, this kind of thing. They helped. They hit them in some cases, except, but many others cleaved to them with flatteries. They cleaved to them, kind of like, "Hey, we'll be praying for you." I mean, just or yeah, we're rooting for you, or yeah, we think you're right, but didn't offer any real help. Okay, they just didn't want to be on the Maccabees' bad side, of the Maccabees won, is basically what it boiled to. And and eventually they did win. And the temple was dedicated again to God. The Hebrew word for dedication is Chanukah. Chanukah is dedication. And there was and it took 8 days to clean the temple after it was done. And for that reason, it's celebrated frequently with a 9-candle Hanukkah. One candle in the middle, the shamash, the servant, that lights the other 8. So the first day you light 1, the second day you light 2. You kind of have a count up, count up. Some people actually count down, but they'll count down today. But counting up's the more common way. And so remember these 8 days. And why 8 days? It took 8 days to clean the temple. There was no miracle of oil. That story never appears until 300 years after Messiah has died and been resurrected. It was made up by the rabbis to compete with these so-called miracle stories of Christmas that never occurred. The only things that occurred were the things in the Bible. All kinds of other. The false church of Rome made all kinds of other miracles associated with by that time. So they did their own miracle story. But the truth is, the real miracle of Hanukkah was 6 men taking on the mightiest empire on earth, rallying, who were a minority in their own land, and the majority of their own people were on the side of the empire. And they won and reestablished, rededicated the temple, reestablished the law of God as the law of the land. Now, they didn't break free from the Seleucid Empire, and become an independent nation, but they did win. The Seleucid Empire gave them freedom of religion, backed off on that, and let the temple be, and let let them ban idolatry, except for in Greek cities walled cities the Greeks owned. Okay, so the Greeks occupied. So This is what happened. This is what happened. So this is important to celebrate. Now, again, it's not a Moedim, not an appointment of God that God made in Leviticus 23. It's a national holiday, kind of like, America, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, that kind of thing. But look at how important Messiah thought this holiday was. John 10, we see this in John 10, 22 through 24. And it was the feast, and it was at Jerusalem, the feast of dedication, and it was winter. And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then came Jews round about him and said to him, how long do you make us doubt? If you be the Christ, as to say the Messiah, tell us plainly. Okay, now look. He's in Nazareth most of the time. He's up in the Sea of Galilee. It took him 2, 3, maybe if he was depending where if maybe been a little north of Capernaum, maybe it took him 4 days if he walked around Samaria, which was common, to get there. Each way in the winter. I used to live in Greece in a similar climate. It's like raining all the time, misting. It sucks all the moisture out of all the heat out of your body. I tell you the truth. I lived there when I'm 40 degrees in Greece. Felt colder than me than when I lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and it was negative 40 because the air was dry there. But in Greece, the humidity was around 100% all the time. And like I said, it just sucks. It just seems like it sucks all the heat, all your body heat out of you. Well, he walks 4 days to this, and also it snows. Jerusalem's gotten as much as 2 foot of snow in the winter, in recent years, in the last 10 years or whatever. Okay, so whatever this weather was like, it wasn't. It was cold it was cold at night, certainly, if not during the day. And he went there and made this walk to be in Jerusalem for this feast because he thought it was that important. And notice where he's spending it at. Where he's at. I mean, it's being celebrated all over Israel, all over Jerusalem. But he goes to the temple at Solomon's porch. And why? Notice that when he does that, they understand they think this is an indication he is the Messiah. They're seeing him in the temple, even in these adverse conditions, to celebrate this dedication of the temple. Really rededication. Chanukah again means dedication. The feast of dedication is Chanukah. And Messiah celebrated it and thought it was important enough to celebrate it in Jerusalem, which wasn't actually commanded, but he thought that was the proper place in his day because he needed that connection, because he knew the importance of Chanukah was the connection between Messiah and the temple, as these other Jews roundabout understood as well. Now, we're going to start looking at that connection. And we're going to start looking for some things they were looking for Messiah to do with concerning the temple, to indicate he was Messiah. And we read these we read these words here in Jeremiah 7:11 through 15, which foreshadows this, which they would have understood if they've been reading the law and the prophets. In this house, which shall be called by my name, is this house which is called by my name become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I have seen it, says the Lord. Now go you unto my place which is in Shiloh, and I will set where I set my name at first, and see what I did for the wickedness of the people of Israel. Now, because you've done these works, says the Lord, and I spake unto you, rising up early and speaking, but you heard not. I called, but you answered not. Therefore I'll do unto this house, which is called my name, wherein you trust, and unto the place I gave to you and to your fathers, as I've done to Shiloh. I will cast you out of my sight, as I've cast out all your brethren, even the whole seed of Ephraim. Okay, first of all, what the Shiloh is in the former northern kingdom. Jeremiah is sent to the people of the southern kingdom after the kingdom divided. Ephraim is the tribe that Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom was in. Okay, so Ephraim is sometimes used for that whole northern kingdom of Israel after the United Kingdom under David and Solomon, and under Saul, David and Solomon divided after the days of Solomon, is sometimes referred to as Ephraim. So that's where the ark first sat, and it was like the temple until the temple was built. Except when it became wicked, the ark got removed out of it. They took it out the battle which the Lord had not told them to do. The Philistines captured it. David sat in Obed. Oh, it's in this guy's barn for 20 years. David brought up there, put in the tabernacle of David. And finally, it was placed in the temple that Solomon built in Judah. Okay, this house that's called by my name. So all that time, the presence of God was gone, and people were still going through the rituals, just like a lot of churches and congregations that meet on Sabbath or Sunday. A lot of them still doing this. They're going to the presence of God is left because of disobedience, but they're still going through the rituals. Well, that's what went on at Shiloh. Well, now God says he's going to do the same thing to this house as the message in Jerusalem, where the ark is now sitting. Why? Because they made it a den of robbers. They were doing things like people come to the sacrifice, find a supposed defect with it, say, "Oh well, look, we'll trade you that one for a good one plus a surcharge, some extra money. Maybe all right for twice as much. Give us two of your turtle doves. We'll give you one." And then later, those same two previously unfit turtle doves were then now the fit ones traded to others, except and all kinds of schemes like that to rob the people of money. It became a den of robbers in their eyes, and as a result, and God sent prophets to them to warn them, but they would not listen. So now the thankless job of Jeremiah is to tell them God's had it. In fact, if you go down the verse, God tells Jeremiah, don't even plead for them. Okay, I ain't going to listen to it. God's had it with them because they turned his house into a den of robbers. And the result was it was destroyed and taken away. Now, in Ezekiel 7:21 through 24, by the Babylonians, in the northern house, Shiloh was destroyed ultimately, and the people taken away by the Assyrians. Now, Ezekiel, who's a prophet during the Babylonian exile, has this to say in Ezekiel 7:21 through 24 about a future group this whole scenario is going to be repeated. A similar scenario is going to be repeated again. And here's what he says: I will give it into the hand of the strangers for a prey, and to the wicked for a spoil, and they shall pollute it. My face I will also turn from this, shall pollute my secret place, for the robbers shall enter it and defile it. Make a chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence. Therefore I'll bring the worst of the heathen, and they shall possess their houses. I'll make the pomp of the strong to cease, and their holy places shall be defiled. Okay, remember, now, so Ezekiel here is talking about a future event after the Temple of Solomon had been destroyed, okay? And this before Nehemiah returns to rebuild to make the second temple. Now, so the second temple's coming, and here's what he says is going to happen to it. Similar thing. They are going to pollute it. Who? The strangers, the wicked of the earth. And notice, so the worst, the heathen. Now, how they pollute it. Now, this happened with the Romans. Before the temple was destroyed, Titus demanded to go into the Holy of Holies, and the high priest ended up taking him. And he says he was very respectful, didn't touch anything, just wanted to look around, But then later, it's destroyed, and Titus had not wanted it destroyed. His men actually did that contrary to his orders. He actually appealed to God because his men disobeyed his orders asking not to be held responsible for his men doing this, not understanding that that was the will of God that they destroyed this because they set the thing on fire and melted the gold, and the gold went down the rocks. And then to get the gold, they pushed the rocks off so that not one stone was left upon another, as Messiah said. Well, so these are the worst of the heathen here that he says is going to happen because they turn into a den of robbers. As they've been turned into den of robbers, it had been robbed and spoiled before. Now another new group of robbers is going to come. The worst of the heathen, the ones with the worst behavior. The Romans were brutal and cruel, and and they had the 10th Legion, Frentis, which was packed full of people from the ancient enemies. They were, a lot more most of those weren't Italians in that legion. They also had auxiliaries from Assyria, etc. All these cruel enemies of Israel were in the 10th Legion, and notice they went and possessed their houses. They went there and they took over. They destroyed a bunch of cities in there and unwalled. And the houses that were left, they went and occupied them and lived in them. Because the city, naked land is full of blight crimes and violence. And this chain indicates, of course, being drug off in captivity or slavery, okay? So this is the same thing. And the same reason here that he warned them and they would not listen. Now let's go to Matthew 21:12-13, where we see Jesus, Messiah, operating in the temple. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all that sowed and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sowed doves, and said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Okay, they know that the people he's talking to know this background of the temple. They know of these events. And now he is saying you're doing the same thing they did in the days of Jeremiah. Now, in their prophecy, he says that we call the house of prayer. And there's one, and the fuller quote would be, as in one of the other gospels, a house of prayer for all nations, okay? But they've made it a den of thieves. He's drawing their attention back to Jeremiah. He's telling them by saying these words that you are bringing the destruction of the temple, and they did not. Their answer, the former ones in Solomon's temple did not listen to the prophets God sent, and neither would they listen to Messiah, the one that Moses said they must obey, the Son of God. When God sent his own son, as Messiah told in a parable, they didn't. They said, "Let's kill the son, and we'll be heirs, and we'll be able to take it for ourselves." So they know he's identifying them as these people, and so Messiah goes in there, and notice what he's doing. He's cleaning the temple. He's dedicating the temple again to God when he's doing this. He's driving out the robbers. He's driving out the wickedness. He is dedicating the temple again. While also pronouncing its doom. Well, pronouncing more accurate, they're going to bring its doom by doing these things. Now, in Nehemiah 7, verses 5-6, we read the following about another important aspect of the temple, why that temple had to be there for Jesus to fulfill his role as Messiah, to even identify him as Messiah. Here's what we see. And God put in my heart to gather the nobles and the rulers and the people that might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a registry of the genealogy of them which came up from the first, and found therein written therein. These are the children of the province that went out of captivity, those have been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away, and came again to Judah and to Jerusalem and to Judah, everyone unto a city. Okay, so everyone's being reckoned by genealogy. And he found the genealogy of those that came at the first, who came there first. And now he's putting everyone's genealogies being kept in the temple, is the point. And if you read the rest of this, there were some who said they were priests, but they couldn't prove this written genealogy. They couldn't be disproved either because the Urim and Thummim had been lost. The high priest couldn't just ask God and know by revelation. And they said, until such a time, we're putting him out of the priesthood. We don't want to take a chance on putting someone who's not a son of Aaron in the priesthood and polluting the temple. So therefore they had to put him out. So this genealogy is very important. You cannot. You've got to have it to prove for certain things like the priesthood that you have the right ancestry required for the position. Well, the same is true about Messiah. And here's what we read in Matthew 1, verse 11 through 17. That part of the genealogy of Messiah from that time, from the time of Nehemiah on. And let's read it. It says, and Josiah begat, and Josias begat Jechonias and his brethren about the time they were carried away to Babylon. After they brought to Babylon, Jechonias and begat Seliathel, and Seliathel begat Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel begat Ebihud, and Ebihud begat Eliakim, and Eliakim begat Azor, and Azor begat Sadoc, and Sadoc begat Akim, and Akim begat Eliud, and Eliud begat Eleazar, Eleazar begat Matan, Matan begat Yachab, Yachab begat Joseph, the husband of Miriam, of whom was born Jesus, Yahshua, that is to say, who is called Christ or Mashiach. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David, the carrying away of Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon under Christ are 14 generations. Okay, at Nehemiah's time, all these were written down from David, okay, to the carrying away of Babylon. Okay, the whole genealogy. Okay, in fact, really going back to Adam, because we know Abraham's back to Adam. Okay, but from David, all right, back to, but particularly since it's concerned this covenant, the people of Israel, Abraham in particular. So you got 14 generations here. Now, on the Babylon, well, during these 14 generations, they had to be keep every year. We'll talk about when this was done in a moment. But every time a child was born, a male child in particular was born, their name was added to the rows, to the genealogies that were being kept in the temple. So they could, if there was a problem in Messiah's genealogy, they would have been able to say it right away. He had to be the son of David. He had to be a descendant. He had to be a descendant of David, King David. Okay, that was absolutely a requirement that's laid out in Scripture several times. So Messiah. So if there was a problem with Yahshua, Messiah, let's say Messiah, Mashiach, if there's a problem with his genealogy where he could not be the Mashiach, his enemies would have found it right away, and including this one that's missed often, that people don't notice. There's a problem with this translation, and I'm going to talk about it in the underlying where the underlying problem comes from. It's not the original text is wrong, but this was translated from Greek. But that Greek text was actually translated from Hebrew. And I'll show you 14 generations from the carrying away of Babylon. Okay, this guy's there carried to Babylon. So after him's 14. Well, let's do it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Well, that's not 14, that's 13. Well, the problem here is if you find now I had one before and I wish I'd copied it and kept a copy, but there's a number of Hebrew Gospels of Matthew. Every single like church father and church historian and whatever from 380 and earlier all said Matthew was written in Hebrew originally and translated into Greek with great difficulty because people who were doing the translating weren't native Hebrew speakers. And as a matter of fact, in the Library of Alexandria, they had placed when they got control of the Romans before they lost it, before they'd lost control of and the Crusaders regained it. They had went to was it Origin I think it was, and some of these others had went to India to get a copy of the Gospel of Matthew written in Hebrew, supposedly by Matthew in Matthew's own handwriting, because that's where he went to was Hebrew, the Malabar coast, the area of Kerala today. The pro that where there was where there was a large Jewish presence, the biggest Jewish presence in India was there, and they had went to the Jews. And anyways, there, him, and Thomas and Alpheus. Anyways, three of them went. Three of them went to India. India is very important there. So they. I mean, this is how convinced they were of the fact of this. They actually went over there and retrieved a copy and brought it back to put in the Library of Alexandria before the Romans lost it. Okay. Now, there's a number of Hebrew copies of Hebrew Gospels of Matthew. The oldest ones, much older than that, like 1,000 years A.D. Most of them are reverse translations. They translated from the Greek into Hebrew, the Greek text into Hebrew. They translated from the Latin text into Hebrew. However, two stood out in the city of Wroclaw, also called Wroclaw by the German, by the Poles, Breslau by the Germans. Breslau had 10 of these. Number 9, Breslau number. What's unique about Breslau number 9? None of these match word for word, except Breslau number 9 in the St. Petersburg, today called Leningrad, copies. They were jot and tittle identical, and they appear to have been gone through this painstaking jot and tittle process where there's a 36-point inspection on every letter that's written down when scribes are transfer or making copies of the word of God. They literally had 32 point inspection of every letter to make sure the font couldn't change, so to speak, And it seems to have went through that process. And it doesn't, and that one, which I used to have a copy of, or it was online EDU, and I should have made myself a copy, downloaded one, but I didn't. It actually says the father of Mary. Now we get 12, 13, if that's father, 14. Okay. And that, yes, there's I read that copy before, and there's only about a few. They're mostly minor things like this. People will catch differences of it, and most of them just clarify, and they just say, "Oh, well, that makes a lot more sense." Okay, there's not really much difference between that and the Greek. It's, again, what the historians had written seems to be is verified by these two witnesses, these two copies, which, by the way, are hard as heck to find. Okay. Well, because people don't want to share them, basically. And it wouldn't surprise me if the other one, the Roman Catholic Church, has, because when they got the Library of Alexandria, they hauled all those books over to Rome. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if they're sitting there holding it in Rome in some, underground somewhere, literally. Okay, now we're going to look at Luke 3, verse 20 to 25. And we're going to read Messiah's part of his genealogy again. And remember, it has to match what's in the temple. If it doesn't match what's in the temple, his enemies would have brought out during his lifetime. It would have instantly disqualified his claim to be Messiah. He cannot be Messiah without the temple and the genealogy in the temple to prove he's got the right genealogy. The record of the genealogy, I should say, in the temple. Now let's read this. And Jesus himself began to be, again, Luke 3, verse 20 through 25. Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli, which was the son of Matan, which was the son of Levi, which was the son of Melchi, which was the son of Jana, which is the son of Matthias, which is the son of Amos, which is the son of Nahum, which is the son of Esli, which is the son of Naga. Okay, so now, what's the first thing you might notice here? Joseph's father here has a different name than here. Okay, every single one of these is different. Heli, Matat instead of Matan. Instead of Matan, we got Matat. Levi instead of Eliezer. Melchi, Melchi instead of Eliud, Yana, Yana in Yana instead of Akeem, Yosef instead of Sadak, instead of Sadak. Okay, Mattathias, like the faithful priest that talked about, instead of Azor, Amos instead of Eliakim, Nahum, Nahum instead of Abiud, instead of Abiud, Esli instead of Zerubbabel, and Naga instead of Salathiel. Now, some people have said, well, look, people had more than one name back then, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. And, maybe they just got the other name. Well, that's totally, I mean, it's unlikely they all went by two different names like this, but there's another problem. From Quinius down to Messiah is 14 generations. In Luke, there's three more generations. It's actually 17 generations. I don't know if I have room to show that or not here. No, I don't. But it's actually 17 generations. Here, let's see. There we go. There's the robo. I guess I did have room. And there's, all right. I mean, and you can see it's actually 17 generations. So Joseph here has a different genealogy he does in Matthew. If you're going with this being, but if Joseph is the father of Mary, as the Hebrew Matthew of Gospel says, then there's no problem. One's of her husband, right here in Luke. One is of Mary. This is Mary's father, not her husband. Joseph, a very common name. And again, now if this had been the case here, where he had 17 generations going by one reckoning and 14 by another, they would have brought that out. They had not only could they say, "Hey, look, you can't. That's not impossible." Okay, the guy had two different lineages, from Jacoinus. Okay, it's not even possible he had that. I mean, people were somewhat intelligent. They had known that. But second of all, they looked at they said, hey, what? They would look at again the written genealogies in the temple and said, hey, one of these is an imposter genealogy, or both, whichever. Okay, so both of these had to be correct. They both had to be right, and that there alone should convince you that the Greek copy of Matthew that this English was translated from is incorrect. Joseph, the father of Mary, very little small difference. I think if I'm right, it's only a jot or a tittle. One letter, it's kind of like the difference between C and G in English, which is a little bit marked difference between two letters, but can change the whole meaning of give you a whole other word. It's a little bit thing like that. This should say the father of Mary. Okay, but Messiah's genealogy again, it would have been brought out. He would have been disqualified right away. The rabbis would have kept record of this, and obviously that flaw did not exist because the temple. That's one reason the temple was needed had to be connected. Messiah could not be revealed without the temple. And the temple had to be dedicated for that to occur. Otherwise, they wouldn't have kept going there and keeping the genealogy. Now, in Luke 2, verse 22 through 26, read the following. When the days of her purification, according to law, were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As is written in the law of the Lord, every male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. And to offer a sacrifice, which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves and two young pigeons. And there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. The same man was just devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Ghost was upon him. It was revealed to him by the Holy Ghost that he should not see death till he was seen of Christ Lord. Okay, the days of purification was 40 days after she gave birth to a male in the law that God gave Moses. If it was a female, 80 days. When that was done, if you're in the land, if you're in the promised land, the land of Israel, you're required to come to the temple. Now, if you can afford it, you're to give a turtle dove or a pigeon and a lamb. But if you're poor, in the poorest group, you can only get you can give two turtle doves or two pigeons. They got to match, and one of them is a substitute for that lamb. This tells us that they were on the poorest group. Okay, Joseph and Mary. Either that or they were committing fraud against God, but that would totally disqualify them for being Messiah's parents to begin with, entrusted with raising him in the first place. Okay, they would be down here even bothering to come down to Jerusalem, make that 3-day walk, if that was the case. So, or maybe it's still in Bethlehem perhaps this time, but still to make that 1-day walk. Okay, they would be going through all that trouble to defraud God by claiming they were poor, and they were. So we know they're poor from this. Okay, so they're in there to do this. This is when they would announce the name. The name would be added into the genealogy. The written genealogy was in the temple. Okay, so as opposed the son of Joseph, because it was written under his name in the temple. And Miriam, Miriam, daughter of Joseph, and Joseph, and Miriam, daughter of Joseph, and Joseph, son of who was it? Heli is what they would have wrote. Okay, so that was when that got written in the temple. Now, because they're there in the temple doing what they're supposed to, now another event can occur to confirm this is Messiah. Here, and that's what goes on the second part down here. You have this man, Simeon, Shimon, and he's just devout. He's trying to walk in all. He's doing his best to walk in all of God's ways all of his days. He's waiting for the consolation of Israel. That's Messiah. And the Holy Ghost was upon him, and it revealed to him that he would not see death till he had seen the Christ Lord. So he's hanging out in Jerusalem waiting. Why? Because if Messiah's parents are going to obey the commandments of God, they're going to come to the temple. It's in Jerusalem. He can't live in the temple. He's not allowed to. But he can live near there, and he can stay out in Jerusalem. And he's hanging out waiting for this. Now, we continue on in Luke 2, verse 27 through 32, and read the following. They came by the Spirit in the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him after the custom of the law, they took him up in his arms, and blessed God and said, Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you prepared before the face of all people, a light to lighten the Gentiles, and the glory of your people Israel. Okay, so he came by the Spirit into the temple. The Spirit knew when the temple came. He knew they'd have to come there. That's why he's hanging out in Jerusalem. Now he's there. Now he's identifying him as Messiah, your salvation. He's telling everyone who's there, who can hear him. Notice that you prepared before the face of all people, not just the Jewish people, the Gentiles as well. There's a light to lighten the Gentiles. The Gentiles are out walking in darkness. They don't even know of God's existence. They're lost without hope. He's a light to them because it's always been of the Gentile, the glory of their people, Israel. And I heard people say recently dumb things like Israel's the center of the Bible. No, it's not. Messiah is. God told Moses, we looked at our recent study just finished recently, on the Acts of Moses. 3 times God told Moses Israel was disposable. He would dispense it. One day he said, I'll get rid of them completely and start over with you, Moses. They were chosen to do a job, and that was to bring the Gentiles. Moses, in all 3 instances, said to God, what would the Gentiles think? What about the Gentiles? They'll say, he brought them in, couldn't take them, he took them out of Egypt, but couldn't bring them into the promised land. Why you got to care about the Gentiles? Because it was always about the Gentiles. They were chosen to walk in God's ways, to show the Gentiles, to draw them to God. The Messiah was prepared before the face of all people. He was meant to save Jew and Gentile alike, starting with the Jews, going to the Gentiles, just like at the feeding of the 5,000. He never gives the bread and fish to the crowds. He gives it to his 12 disciples representing Israel, the 12 tribes. They give it to the crowds representing the Gentiles. But if they refuse to give it, Messiah wouldn't be like, well, I'm just stuck now. No, God wouldn't like that either. The glory of your people, Israel. Messiah is the one who's going to bring glory to Israel. When he's ruling the earth, then they'll be lifted above all other nations. Well, this man's bringing this out. He's confirming that this child is Messiah. This 40-day-old child is Messiah. Now, let's continue on in Luke 2, verse 36 through 39. And there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel, the son of Asher, of the tribe of Asher. She was of great age and lived with her husband 7 years from her virginity. She was a widow of about 80 years. 84 years, which departed not from the temple, serving God with fastings and prayers night and day. She was coming in at that instant, gave thanks likewise to God, spake to all of them that looked for the redemption of Jerusalem. They reformed all things according to the law of the Lord. They returned to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth. Okay. Now, let's talk about this. So this woman, Anna, there's some outstanding things about her. Let's begin with those. And they may have been Hannah. There's no H sound in Greek, so when they translate from Hebrew to Greek, they would get rid of the H. First of all, she's a prophetess. Said, well, it's true. Malachi said there would be was it Malachi? No, maybe it wasn't Malachi. But space. Anyways, said that there'd be a famine, not for food, but for the word of God. And that God would not speak to the people. And for 400 years, people said, well, that ended when John the Baptist came. He was not the first. Anna was. No, she's a prophetess. God began speaking to the people of Israel again through a woman, not through a man. Not through John the Baptist, a man, through a woman. Now, notice her tribe. I said Asher, and you may say, what says A? There's no sh. The Greeks, I used to live in Greece, they can't even make the sh sound. There's no sh. So when they see a sheen, they transliterate it into a s, into a sigma. Okay. Okay, translate as if it was a somic in Hebrew. Now, this is Asher. Now, remember, we looked at a few lessons back on Moses, in the death of Moses, the blessing of the tribe of Asher was strength as long as they lived. That was part of their blessing. This woman's from there. Okay, and now notice. Let's just say she didn't remember. God said they're children. She called them children. I call them children till they're 20 years old. So let's assume he doesn't have children marrying. They're falling the way of the heathen, like people mistakenly say, well, Mary was in her teens. No, that's what the heathen did. The godly said adults 20 and wait till they were 20 to marry. So this would make her 27 when her husband died. Then she was a widow for 84 years after that. Now she's 111. But as her days were, so were her strength, because she's from Asher. And how she spent those 87 years? Fasting and prayer. Everyone knows she's a prophet. She's established as the one there. They've seen her. They've heard. And remember, if you say something from God, it's going to have a sign and wonder, or it's got something that will come to pass, and it don't, the penalty's death. She's established as a prophetess. Okay, she's in the temple, and what's the purpose of all this? Was for her to be in the temple, not the part of the temple, because she's let everyone know this is the one I've been telling you about. Gave instant thanks to the Lord, and spake of him that is Messiah, Jesus, to all them that looked for redemption in Israel, that redemption being Messiah. So the temple served to confirm that Messiah had the right genealogy. The temple also was the first place where Messiah was confirmed to the religious leaders, the political leaders, and the common people of Israel who were present, that Yeshua was the Messiah. Now we're talking about another important aspect of the Messiah, an important job that needed the temple to be done. And here it is in Exodus 18, verse 19 to 20. And this is Jethro talking to Moses. Hearken now to remember, Jethro was a priest of God. Hearken now to my voice. I will give you counsel. God shall be with you. Be you for the people to Godward, that you may bring their causes unto God. Shall teach the judge in the law, ordinance and the laws, shall show them the way they were in us, and walk in the work that they must do. Okay, so he tells them to get other judges under him to help with the work. He is the first judge. What's his job? Teach the ordinance and the laws. Show them the way they should walk, the way they walk, and the work they must do. Not just tell them what the law says, but how to obey it the way God intended. Okay. So they're not trying to do the right thing. They're doing the wrong thing, but they think they're doing the right thing. So they not know what it says, but also how to do it the way God intended. That's the job of the judge, Moses being the first one. But it didn't end with Moses. Now we're going to go to, in his big speech we looked at in Deuteronomy 17, verses 9 through 13, the law of the judge, which was given right before the law of the king. Because before the king, the judge is the one who is the head of the political leader. And let's read what it says. You shall come unto the priests, the Levites, and to the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire. And they shall show you the sentence of judgment. You shall do according to the sentence for in that place which they of that place the Lord shall choose shall show you. You shall observe to do all according to all they inform you, according to the sentence of the law which they teach you, and according to the judgment that they tell you, you shall do. You shall not decline from the sentence they shall show you to the right hand or to the left. And the man will do presumptuously, will hearken to the priest that stands in the midst for the Lord thy God, or unto the judge. Even that man shall die, and you shall put evil away from Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear and do more presumptuously. Okay, now, so besides the priest and the high priest, there's this judge. He's going to do what Moses did. First there was Moses, then the Aaronic priesthood came. Okay. Again, he's going to tell them how to keep the law that God gave Moses in the way God intended. And you're not to do from it. And notice this, that they will not hearken to that priest or that judge. Well, this sounds just like in the next chapter, Deuteronomy 18, where it says, I'll raise up a prophet like unto Moses, and that people must obey him. Whoever will not obey him, I'll destroy from among the people. The same kind of language here about the judge. So in the and notice where he did this. Where he did this, the place the Lord shall choose, the temple. So in the temple, the judge was to teach people how to obey God's commandments the way God always intended. And if you didn't listen to him, you were going to be destroyed from among the people. Now let's go to Matthew 21 through 23 and read the following. And when he's come in the temple, the chief priests, the elders came to him while he was teaching and said, "By what authority do you these things? Who gave you this authority?" They know by him sitting in the temple and teaching that he is fulfilling that position of judge. And indeed, he is the judge. He's going to be judge of all the earth. All are either going to be judged. All are going to be standing before him in judgment one day. Either before the great white throne judgment, where they're going to be found they're not in the Lamb's book of life, or in the the great white throne judgment where the saints stand before him. The saints are going to stand before him, where he's going to judge them and reward them and put them in position according to their works, or in that terrible great white throne judgment where he's going to destroy, where they're going to be shown, they're going to be judged according to their works and cast in the lake of fire. But he is indeed the ultimate judge. They knew this is a role of Messiah. That Samuel was not the final judge. Messiah was. All those were pictures of Messiah. And that's what they want to know why by authority. And he went on to tell them, tell me who John the Baptist baptized by. Was it by men or God? And I'll answer you. And the implication here is it was by God put him in that authority. They understood that he is showing that he is Messiah by acting as the judge in the temple, by teaching people in the temple. Teaching them how to walk in the ways of God. But they're not the only ones. Let's continue on here. We're going to continue on here. We're going to see that it wasn't just them. And we're going to see when he got trained and when this process even started. And this is in Luke 2, verse 46 through 49. It came to pass after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And they saw him and were amazed. And they were amazed, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Behold, your father and I have sought you sorrowing." And he said to them, "How is it that you have sought me? Know you not that I must be about my father's business?" West is Old King James for no. Okay. They would just say no. K-N-O-W. Okay, so 3 days they found him. Okay. And we're doctors. This is not, don't think medical doctors. Think doctors' theology. Think of doctors of the Torah, of the law. Okay. The scribes, Pharisees, except the Sadducees. They're leaders. And he's listening to them. He's asking them questions. And he's giving them. And he says, well, by doing that, he's doing his father's business. Well, the judge, before he could judge, had to have a clear understanding of the scripture himself. Okay? He had to be prepared. And that's what he's doing here. He's preparing for that role as judge. That's what his father had sent him to do. That's why he says, my father's business. Not about Joseph, the carpenter, that business. It's about his heavenly father, the one who sent him, his business. And he's got an understanding, and that's showing even from then on, early on, he has been selected to be judge. He's got an understanding it's beyond human ability, like the judges like Moses and them had to have. Because remember, they're speaking to the people Godward and bringing the people's issues they're an intermediary between God and people. These questions and answers. And this, he's 12 years old when this occurs. And this is not dissimilar of what happens with a bar mitzvah. To have a minyan, a synagogue, Hebrew, I mean Greek synagogue, bet is also in Hebrew known as a bet din. Okay, it's a bet knesset, a house of assembly, or also called a bet din, a house of judgment. Why? Because they would decide things like marriages and stuff had to be confirmed for the elders, like you saw in Ruth in the book, like you see in the book of Ruth. Okay, it took 10, like in the book of Ruth. That's for a minyan. We're supposed to be 60 years old and older. But when Israel was doing wickedly, like we read about with the days of Matthias, the days in the days of in the days that observed by remembered with Chanukah, it was hard to find. You couldn't always find people enough people who are 60 and above who are also keeping God's commandments and living and holding on and clinging to the covenant, God's laws. And they judged it was more important to be grabbing on the God's laws than the age. So they lowered it down to 40, and they finally got down to 12 because when boys go into puberty because they were just that desperate. So then you had to do a little study and show you had some understanding. You were then called a bar mitzvah in Aramaic, a son of the mitzvah of the commandments. When you've done this, that's where the bar mitzvah ceremony today comes from. And typically, people have to read a passage in Hebrew from a little Torah section in Hebrew, and uh, often Jewish people just do that, and it's all the Hebrew they ever learned, and they just forget it here in America. And so if you ask them, "Yeah, Davarim Ivrit," they look at you like, "Huh?" And that's obviously a low no. They don't know how to speak Hebrew, but so. So so there's that preparation here, that preparation here, so that you got the same sort of preparation here going with Messiah. He's got to have that understanding and demonstrate as that understanding before he can be the position of judge in the temple. Now, in Acts 21, I mean Luke 21:37 through 38, read the following about other people who, besides those religious authorities, didn't like it, recognizing he's being judged. In that day, he was teaching the temple, and at night he went out in the abode in a mount called the Mount of Olives. All the people came early in the morning to him in the temple for to hear him. Okay, remember the judge could be of any tribe. Okay, and off the top of my head, I do not know of a single one from Levi. Probably couldn't be from Levi because they were the priesthood. But any of the other tribes, and those other 12 tribes, yeah. So various times, they're from various tribes. So they recognize the people here recognize him. They're coming to hear him to teach them. He's teaching them how to obey God's commandments the way God intended. He could not be doing this. He could not be showing he was God's ultimate judge without the temple. And that could not happen. He could not go in the temple if it was still desecrated. It had to be cleansed and dedicated for him to show himself that he was God's ultimate judge in the temple. Show he's the ultimate judge. So Messiah, there's no separation of Messiah from the temple. You can't have one without the other. Now continue on in John 7:10 through 14. We see again where Messiah is again boldly going to show that he is that ultimate judge that Moses is only a picture of, and all the judges up through Samuel were only pictures of. And here's what you see. And when his brother went up, they also went up to the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. Then the Jews saw him at the feast, said, "Where is he?" After much murmuring the people concerning him, some said, "He's a good man." Others said, "Nay, they deceive the people." Howbeit no man spoke openly of him for fear of the Jews. Now about the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. Okay, so His brother had gone up. He's gone up to the feast, but not openly. What feast? We're talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay. Feast of Tabernacles. Remember, that's a picture. That's a picture of the end time. It's a picture of the millennial reign, and the eighth day being a picture of the new heaven, new earth, as we discussed when we a while back during the time of the Feast of Tabernacles when we in that season when we talked about Messiah. We talked about the tribulation and the kingdom. Okay, it's a picture of God dwelling with men. Here in this feet in the middle of God dwelling with men, he's in the temple. He goes up in the temple and teaches, showing he is that God man that God said, that prophet, that ultimate judge, that God would judge all the people through. When God, that judge that would be God, that God dwelling among men. So, so the leaders of the temple understood he was, but understood by him going to the temple and teaching he was judge. The people understood it. He demonstrated and he prepared for it in the temple as well to fulfill that role. And none, of course, that would be possible without the temple. And without doing that, he wouldn't be clearly identified as Messiah. Now, now we're going to talk about another role he has connected with the temple. And for many people, it's probably the most important role. Why that temple had to be dedicated for him to be Messiah. He could not, he had to come in the fullest time, and that meant the temple had to be dedicated and up and running. And here's what we read in Exodus 25, 37 through 40 about the construction of the temple. It's the tabernacle, which was a foreshadow of which forerunner of the temple was the temple later was modeled after the tabernacle. And here's what we read: You shall come, and you shall make 7 lamps thereof, and shall light the lamps thereof, they may give light over against it. And the tongs thereof, and the snuff dish thereof shall be of pure gold. A talent of pure gold he shall make it with all these vessels. And look at you them after their pattern, which is shown you in the mount. Okay. Chanukah is also called the Feast of Dedication. As I mentioned before, a special 9-branch menorah, not 7 like this one. It's in the temple, but 9 with a middle one called the shamus that lights the others. Well, in his days, it wasn't candles like people commonly do today in America, sometimes even light bulbs. It was oil, like olive oil. And it was, and then remind them of the temple, of course, using the pure olive oil like was required in the temple. And people typically put those in their windows. So there's lights everywhere. For that reason, it's also known as the Festival of Lights. But that point of that branch that was using menorah, that menorah was to remind them of the menorah in the temple with 7 branches. Okay, and it had that pure olive oil. That because now later it comes this manufactured story that there's only 1 day of oil and it lasted for 8. Again, didn't occur till 300 years. Never found anywhere any writings, any writings, even the oral writings that the rabbis wrote down that have been passed down. It wasn't even in those. Okay, until it was actually added later that at Yevna. Okay. And where the misnamed Jerusalem Talmud was written, because it wasn't actually written. It wasn't actually written there. It was written. Well, the Greek name was Tiberias, and it was actually an unclean place. The city was built on a graveyard, on an ancient graveyard, and being on top of a grave made you unclean according to the law that God gave Moses. So even this, they didn't call it that. They didn't call it that, though. They called it the Jerusalem Talmud instead. But even it was written in an unclean place, showing its uncleanness. So they made up that whole story. But what's not made up is there was a menorah, and there was everything in the tabernacle, everything in it was made after the pattern Moses saw in the mount. When he was up on Mount Sinai, God showed him exactly what these things look like, so they can be made correctly. I mean, you could just say 9 branches and the guy could just be guessing. But Moses could say, no, no, you got to change the shape a little, etc., so on and so forth. Make it look, make it look as much as on earth as possible to what Moses saw on the mount. Okay, so that's this tabernacle, but there's a problem with this tabernacle. And this tabernacle and the temples that follows. And that's what Stephen brings up here in Acts 7, verses 45 through 50 in his defense about preaching Messiah. And here's what he says, which also our fathers came after brought in with Yahshua into the possession of the Gentiles, who God drove out before the face of our fathers unto the days of David, who found favor before God and desired a tabernacle for God of the God of Jacob. But Solomon built him a house, albeit the Most High dwells not in temples made with hands, says the prophets. Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What house will you build me, says the Lord? Or what shall be the place of my rest? Has not my hand made all these things? Okay, so now notice it says Jesus here. You'll notice in this King James we're looking at here. Well, Greek is Jesus, and the Jesus in the Septuagint is also for Joshua in English. Yahshua is in Hebrew is Jesus in English. It's also Joshua in English. Joshua they brought in with Joshua into the possession of the Gentiles. Those Gentiles being those 7 nations that God had said they were to drive out. And notice God drove those nations out before until the days of David. Never gonna get rid of them all because we'll talk about that more. But because God's deal was I'll go before you and take care of what you can't. You go behind me and take care of what you can. But when you quit taking care of what you can, I'm going to quit. The Malachi Adonai, the angel of the Lord, is going to quit going before you to take care of what you can't take care of. That was the deal, remember, that God had given them, as we saw in our series. So now David after David got this all settled, got the kingdom established and settled. He wants to build this tabernacle, but God won't let him because he's a blame man. And Solomon, his son, who's peaceful, that's what his name means, Shalomo, means peaceable, he built in the temple. But what does the prophet say? That temple is only a earthly representation. You can't really build me a temple on earth that's adequate. Doesn't matter how much gold you spend on it and blah, 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 and all this stuff that, Solomon spent perhaps several $100 billion on this building. God's thrones, heaven's his throne, earth's his footstool. It's, how are you going to build him a house? All you can do is build a representation of that house on the earth. Now, so we go to Hebrews 8, 1 through 5, and we talk about the real house. That house that Moses saw, the pattern of, the one that Solomon built that was only a miniature to give you an ideal of this house. And this temple. Here's what we read. Now these are the things that are spoken of this psalm. We have such a high priest to sit on the right hand of the throne of majesty in heavens, a minister of the sanctuary, of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. For a high priest, every high priest is ordained to the gifts and sacrifice, where it is a necessity that a man have somewhat to also to offer. For everyone on the earth, he should be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law, who serve under the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he's about to make the tabernacle. For see, he says, that you shall make all things according to the pattern shown you in the mount. Okay. They have a high priest. This is Messiah Paul Shoal's talking about. He's not from the tribe of Levi, which is required if you're on the earth. the high priest had to be from the son of Aaron, so on and so forth, which Messiah wasn't from Judah, except he, if he was on earth, he could not be a priest. Doesn't have the right genealogy. Can't be from, can't have a genealogy traced through your father's lineage from two tribes, okay? To your father's lineage alone. So those priests were only an example of of the things that were going on. There are all these rituals they did with sacrifice stuff, or a picture of something more important that only that would happen in the eternal, the temple in the heavenlies, that only Messiah could go into. But you need that tabernacle, that temple on earth. So, because Paul wrote this, Shaul, and it's very plain from Hebrews, from the last chapter, the bottom. He knows Timothy, those of Italy, those of Italy. If you go read Romans, those people, those list of names in Italy, Rome's in Italy. If you're not sure, it greets, saying in chapter 1, he'd never been there. Then greets people. They were all people that were also in Corinth. He was in Italy, wrote to people in Corinth. Corinth being 50% Jewish, and he just starts this letter off with no introduction. And he jumps right in with Hebrew things written for people who had assumed who knew these things or should have known them, who grew up in synagogues, so on and so forth. Well, Hebrews, hence the name Hebrews. So they know this, that that high priest in this earthly temple, they've seen it. Many of them would go on a pilgrimage. There's uncommon people make a commitment to go on one, if God should let them live long enough, to go on one pilgrimage at least in their lifetime to Jerusalem for one of these feasts. And sometimes, they would go down for they had relatives there. They may stay a year or whatever. They'd be there at the Feast of Tabernacles, at the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and they would see these things. So they understand what Shaul, the Apostle Paul's writing about. Now, let's continue on Hebrews 9, verse 11 through 14, our last section here, and we're going to see what Messiah does in this temple that's in heaven, that the earthly one's only a picture of. The high priest, does that only the high priest on earth is only a picture of him, what he's going to do in heaven. Here's what it says: but Christ, Messiah, being a high priest of good things to come, by a greater or more perfect tabernacle or temple, not made with hands. Let's say not this building, not made by human hands, okay? Not made on earth. Neither by the blood of bulls and goats, but by his own blood, he entered once into the holy place, the true holy of holies, the one in the heavens, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctified the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? Okay, so on earth, the blood of bulls and goats, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but particularly it's talking about the Day of Atonement. And everyone had to be sprinkled with the ashes of a red heifer to be made clean to be able to come into the temple. Okay, it only purified their flesh. If they got unclean again, they had to get more ashes of red heifer again, so on and so forth. It wasn't eternal. It was only their flesh. Their flesh isn't eternal. Their body, they will die. Their spirit will leave their body one day, and their body will die. Okay, it's temporary. But Messiah he took his own blood. He offered himself where on the cross without spot to God. He was without sin. Not to purge the flesh temporarily, but to purge our conscience from dead works. So that we know, first of all, so we no longer have a condemnation for our sins, but also we no longer have a mind a sinful mind. A mind that cannot serve God, so we'll have one that can serve God. Remember, to be carnally minded is death. The spiritually minded is life and peace. But the carnal mind is not subject to God's law, nor indeed can be. So you have the eternal spirit to keep the law of God. And that was made possible through Messiah. And Messiah did the same thing to the eternal Spirit. The Spirit helped him, was a helper to him as well on the cross. And also to, to these things in the spirit world as well, the unseen world as well as the seen world. And this is why he told Mary, "You can't touch me." He had to go up and do this. Now, offer his own blood as an atonement. Now let's go on and read some more about what that priest on earth is a picture of Messiah on the temple on earth is a picture that Messiah did as our high priest forever in the eternal in the temple that's in heaven. Whereupon the first temple was dedicated neither was the first testament dedicated without blood. For Moses spoke every precept to all the people according to law. He took the blood of calves and goats with scarlet and wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book and the people, saying, the blood of the testament of God, of the blood of the testament which God has enjoined unto you. Moreover, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and the vessel of the ministry. And almost all things by the law were purged with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no remission. Okay, so when Moses, he had to dedicate the first testament. Remember, the death of a testator. Well, so these blood bulls and goats were a substitute for Messiah, okay? A picture of Messiah. Messiah, with his own blood, the second dedicated. But the first one he's talking about here, though, God has enjoined unto you the blood of this testament which God has enjoined to you. It joined him to God. The blood, this blood that was temporary, it joined him to God. And they sprinkled it. And notice, almost everything were purged with blood. The tabernacle and the vessels of ministry. Only thing I can think of off the top of my head that was the outer curtain. And okay, I don't remember there being any mentioning of it. But again, almost all things. Okay, the altar, the holy of the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah or lampstand, the showbread table, the altar of incense, all blood sprinkled on them. And that book, and notice they're joined together with the book by the blood being sprinkled on the people and the book. They're joined to the covenant. And that covenant joins them to God. But as we saw, there's a problem. They broke it. Okay. But now, because now that was only a picture of what Messiah would do. This earthly priest, this earthly temple was necessary at that time so people can understand Messiah, because that temple is about Messiah at the end, in the end, as is everything in the entire Bible, as I said before. In fact, all of history is his story. It was therefore necessary that the patterns of things in heaven should be purified by these, but heavenly things themselves with better sacrifice than these. For Christ is not here in the holy place made with hands, which are a figure of the true, but to heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nearer yet should he offer himself often to the priest of the holy place forever with the blood of others. But he must offer himself, for then he must often suffered since the foundation of the world. But now, in the end of the world, he has put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. First I want to start this word world. It's aeon, in Greek. It's ages, the end of the age. The age is referring to is not the one we live in today, obviously. Not the not the one when there's the end and there's new heaven, new earth. Not the end of the war of the. That's literally the end of the world as we know it, where it's all destroyed by fire and placed in new heaven, new earth. The end of the age. The age ended with when he did this. Okay, with resurrection, he went through to offer his own blood. Okay, that ended that age. No more expecting Messiah. No more waiting for Messiah to do what's necessary to cleanse us from sin. The whole thing is over. okay, when he does this. That's the age it's referring to. This is what really happened. And those things that are on earth that they could see in the temple were pictures of that. That picture of the high priest in the temple on earth was absolutely necessary so they could understand the high priest in heaven where they could not see what he was doing, how he gave his own blood, not the blood of bulls and goats. The blood of bulls and goats have been sufficient when they had to keep being offered year after year. But he, once by his own blood, cleansed us from sin forever. He put away sin by the sacrifice himself. He didn't cover it up, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, to cover up, literally to cover up, sort of sweep it under the rug or cover it up. He got rid of it. And he is, and he is. So, and that's all I've got for this week. Until next week, shalom.